May you have as much joy being holed up in a room or two with your family as I had with my dear Roses.
What if the world's most comforting laugh didn't slowly fade from the spotlight, but disappeared in total silence before anyone, anywhere, even realized something was wrong? Just before sunrise, at exactly 4:48 a.m. on January 30th, 2026, the heavy stillness inside a quiet Los Angeles home was suddenly ripped apart by a frantic emergency call, one that tore straight through the darkness and into a moment no one could ever undo. In that instant, there were no glowing studio lights, no cheering audiences, and not a single trace of the outrageous wigs and unforgettable fashion that made Moira Rose's wardrobe legendary. Instead, what filled the air was something far more haunting: the sharp, cruel cry of approaching sirens and the soft, fragile, fading breath of a true comedy legend slipping quietly away. After more than 4 decades of teaching the world how to laugh through heartbreak, grief, and life's sharpest edges, Catherine O'Hara took her final bow, leaving behind a legacy so powerful, so deeply human, that even words struggle to contain it. When official statements were released shortly after, they offered almost no comfort, painfully brief, carefully guarded, and pointing only to a short illness that claimed her far sooner than anyone was ready to accept. For millions of people around the world, the loss felt impossible to understand and even harder to believe, especially because only days earlier she still seemed completely untouchable. So how could a woman who radiated energy, warmth, humor, and quiet strength simply vanish in the space of one ordinary silent night? Today, we are not counting trophies, we are not listing awards, and we are not rushing through film credits. Today, we are remembering a beautiful soul, someone who gave the world everything she had, while guarding her deepest struggles in complete silence. As fans around the globe mourn the unforgettable mother from Home Alone and the wildly eccentric diva from Schitt's Creek, very few people ever truly understood the physical reality she carried with her every single day. From the very moment she entered the world, Catherine O'Hara arrived differently, quite literally, through a twist of fate that now feels almost poetic for someone so wonderfully unique. Hidden far from public view, she lived with an extremely rare condition known as situs inversus, a private reality most people could never have imagined. Unlike yours or mine, her heart did not beat on the left side of her chest. It rested on the right, quietly defying expectation. Her entire body was a mirror of typical human anatomy, shaped differently from the very beginning of her life. And maybe, just maybe, that is exactly why she learned to see the world through a lens no one else ever could. Yet beneath the laughter, beneath the applause, and even beneath this extraordinary biology, lived an unshakable determination to protect her private life at all costs. Hidden beneath a soft, carefully guarded promise about her health, she chose to stay silent right up until that devastating morning finally arrived. But what truly happened during those final 72 hours, the fragile stretch of time that led Macaulay Culkin, her beloved on-screen son, to break down in tears and quietly admit that he honestly believed there was still more time left? As we slowly begin to pull back the curtain on her sudden passing, what comes into focus is not a story of scandal or controversy, but something far more powerful, a portrait of gentle, unshakable courage, the kind she carried with her all the way to her very last breath. To understand just how deep and meaningful the silence she leaves behind really is, we have to return first to the joyful orchestra of laughter she conducted for nearly 5 extraordinary decades. Long before her name ever became familiar to millions, Catherine didn't simply find her way into the entertainment world. She burst into it, driven by a rare, unmistakable brilliance that demanded attention and refused to disappear into the background. Raised inside a loud, loving Catholic household in Toronto, surrounded by 6 siblings and constant beautiful chaos, she learned early on that humor was more than a way to entertain. In that crowded home, laughter became survival. Miss the punchline and you vanished into the noise. That sharp instinct, honed in the middle of family chaos, eventually carried her straight into the brutal, fast-paced, improvisational battleground of Second City in the 1970s. It was unforgiving, it was fiercely competitive, and it was overwhelmingly male. Yet Catherine stood shoulder to shoulder with rising legends like John Candy and Eugene Levy, and never once shrank herself to fit the room. Even then, she was never meant to be remembered as simply the woman in the cast. She became something far more unforgettable than a counterpart. What truly set her apart was her astonishing ability to transform. She was a genuine shapeshifter, an actress who could disappear so completely into a character that Catherine herself seemed to melt away in front of the audience. And then came the moment that would forever lock her image into the memories of generations of children across the world. It happened in 1990, and the film that quietly changed everything was Home Alone. When she looked into the camera and cried out Kevin's name inside that chaotic, crowded airport, she gave the world far more than a line of dialogue. In that single desperate breath, she carved herself into the emotional heartbeat of every holiday season. Year after year, families invited her back into their living rooms. As the frantic, loving, beautifully imperfect mother they felt they already knew. Slowly, almost without realizing it, she became comfort itself. A familiar presence, a reassuring face that gently promised joy and a happy ending. But a spotlight that bright carries a weight most people never notice. While audiences fell in love with the effortless magic of Delia Dietz in Beetlejuice and the warmth and chaos of Kate McAllister, few ever paused to see the artist behind the curtain, quietly haunted by the pressure to be perfect. Behind the laughter, Catherine lived with intense stage nerves and a humility so deep it often blurred into private self-doubt. For her, comedy was never a carefree playground. It was a precision craft, a high-stakes experiment. Every word, every pause, and even the smallest flicker of expression was carefully studied, reshaped, and tested again and again until she was certain the audience would feel exactly what they were meant to feel. That relentless devotion to precision, to getting it right, would ultimately guide her to what many now consider her crowning achievement, Schitt's Creek. Stepping into the world of Moira Rose, Catherine created a character so singular, so unforgettable, that the very air seemed to shift around her. With an accent no one could quite place, a revolving wall of extravagant wigs, and a presence that filled every room, she sparked a cultural phenomenon in her 60s, a time when most Hollywood careers are already winding down. Few actresses ever experience a triumphant third act like hers, and she embraced it with dazzling, uncompromising brilliance. Awards piled up, critics applauded, and audiences cheered with a fervor usually reserved for the young. She proved something profound, that true talent does not fade with age. It intensifies, matures, and leaves the world in awe. At the height of her power, Catherine O'Hara seemed untouchable, unstoppable, and timeless. Her vocabulary became a treasure trove of laughter, her style a signature impossible to ignore, and fans came to expect her next witty line as if it were inevitable. Yet, even the brightest stars cast shadows, and while the world marveled at the glow of her career resurgence, time quietly, patiently, relentlessly continued its march. The laughter she inspired was so thunderous, it nearly drowned out the subtle whispers of mortality that lingered nearby. As the applause for Schitt's Creek eventually began to fade, a far more challenging chapter was unfolding behind the private doors of her life, one that no comedic timing, no clever line could soften. Behind the curtain, the woman who seemed to have tamed time itself was facing truths far more intricate, far more human than anyone could ever imagine. Carrying the weight of comedic greatness is never light. The world expects joy, effortless charm, and sparkle at all times, yet it rarely sees the costs. For Catherine, the path to acclaim was paved not only with standing ovations, but with quiet, piercing losses she rarely revealed. To truly appreciate the strength she displayed in her final years, one must first recognize the wounds she carried long before the spotlight ever found her. She came from a golden era of comedians, forged in the close-knit family of SCTV, and she watched far too many of her peers vanish from the stage long before their time. The deepest wound, perhaps, was the sudden death of her dear friend and former flame, John Candy. In 1994, Catherine faced the grieving world herself, delivering a moving, heartfelt eulogy while quietly concealing her own shattered heart beneath a composed exterior. That moment revealed the essence of who she was. From early on, she understood the unspoken truth. The show must go on, even when laughter dies inside. This rule became both her shield and her strategy in an industry that so often discards women as they age. Catherine fought quietly, fiercely, not by complaint or protest, by sheer dedication, by outworking everyone around her, proving that resilience often speaks in silence, yet cannot be denied. The physical toll of Catherine O'Hara's relentless devotion is a story that cameras almost never tell. Every grueling day on the sets of Schitt's Creek, every heart-wrenching scene in The Last of Us demanded a stamina that would crush someone half her age. Yet no cracks ever appeared in her carefully crafted facade. Colleagues recall her as the first to arrive, the last to leave, a perfectionist who bore every ache silently so the production never would. And in retrospect, we are forced to confront a haunting question. In those final performances, was she quietly suffering? Did she push her body past its limits, driven by the unspoken fear of disappointing the audience who loved her so dearly? There is a bitter irony buried deep in the life of a performer. They give everything, the energy, the spirit, the soul, until there is almost nothing left for themselves. For decades, Catherine O'Hara perfected the illusion of inexhaustible vitality. Every smile, every gesture, every laugh we witnessed was crafted with painstaking care. Behind Moira Rose's iconic wardrobe, behind her seemingly boundless energy, she concealed the slow, inevitable passage of time. She shielded the world from the truth of her mortality so convincingly that when she finally passed, it shattered our assumptions. We had all believed she was untouchable. By January 2026, however, even her tireless body could no longer keep pace with the force of her spirit. The brief illness reported in the press was likely the final surrender of a system driven entirely by willpower and devotion to craft. In her final days, she kept her circle small, sparing the public the private anguish she endured, just as she had done her entire life. In a city obsessed with scandal and spectacle, Catherine O'Hara performed the ultimate act of defiance. She refused to be a victim. While other stars became entangled in contract battles or tabloid drama, her career flourished in a deliberate, almost conspiratorial silence. But do not mistake that quiet for ease. The deepest rivers run unseen, and her fiercest battles were never against directors or co-stars. They were against fame itself. For decades, she waged a high-stakes, invisible war with an industry eager to confine her. When Hollywood tried to pigeonhole her as a zany sidekick, she insisted on being recognized as a leading lady. When the press probed her private life, she closed the door with grace and finality. Rumors always lingered, as they do in Hollywood. Many whispered about her long absences, speculating fatigue or disillusionment. Others hinted at her quiet refusal to compromise for a system that had consumed legends like John Candy and Gilda Radner. But Catherine had learned early on how to protect herself, silently, relentlessly, and without apology. She mastered the art of survival, not by hiding her brilliance, but by controlling how it was revealed. And in the end, she left the world in awe, her truth known only to those she chose to share it with. She built her inner circle like a fortress, a carefully guarded sanctuary where toxicity could never penetrate. Every detail was deliberate, every boundary measured with near impossible precision. For decades, she fought a hidden war, one that the cameras never saw, striving to protect a fragment of normal life in a world that demanded nothing short of the extraordinary. She chose motherhood, she chose marriage, she chose family over and over, even as agents tugged at her time, producers pulled at her energy, and Hollywood whispered for more than she was willing to give. Irony had a cruel streak. The very years that finally crowned her with the recognition she had long earned thanks to the phenomenon of Schitt's Creek also carried whispers she could not dismiss. By late 2025, the industry chatter had shifted. Conversations no longer revolved around her next scene-stealing role. They lingered instead on her absences. Gala invitations went unanswered, filming schedules shifted at the last moment. Each explanation, minor conflicts, scheduling errors, nothing serious, felt plausible, yet to anyone paying attention, the cracks were undeniable. Even those closest to her sensed it, a subtle withdrawal, different from the elegant privacy she usually maintained. Was it fatigue? Was it a silent betrayal of a body that was quietly growing weaker? On stage, the public witnessed nothing but flawless poise, winning smiles and applause. Behind closed doors, however, an unspoken story had begun to unfold, a story dense with tension, unease, and quiet alarm. The woman who had mastered controlling her own narrative, who had shaped every public appearance, every word, every laugh, now faced a story she could not edit. Her shield of silence, the armor that had protected her for decades, was about to break. And it wasn't gossip, paparazzi, or tabloid headlines that would pierce it, but the undeniable truth of her condition. As January 2026 waned, the stage was set for a departure no one fully saw coming, one that would leave the world wondering what had quietly slipped beneath their notice. Then it happened, suddenly, sharply. A Friday morning like any other was shattered, not by a speech, not by a long explanation, because that was never her way, but by a single devastating announcement that reverberated across the globe. Catherine O'Hara had passed away after a brief illness. Those 4 words hung in the air like a paradox, at once a revelation and a concealment. The final act of a woman who had given everything to the camera, yet had fiercely guarded her personal battles. In the hours that followed, the echoes of her life spoke louder than words ever could. Hollywood, which had so often overlooked the quiet brilliance of her craft, was forced to confront an emptiness impossible to ignore. But the most piercing tribute came from someone who knew her best, her on-screen son, Macaulay Culkin. For decades, he had played the lost boy to her frantic, unforgettable mother figure. Hours after the announcement, Culkin stripped away the layers of performance and celebrity. His tribute did more than honor a co-star. It revealed the second mother he had found in Catherine, a bond forged over 30 years of shared laughter, quiet moments, and unspoken understanding. In speaking her truth for her, he left Hollywood stunned, moved, and broken-hearted all at once. The unbearable weight of unfinished business slammed into the world harder than anyone could have anticipated. "I thought we had time," he wrote, a simple sentence that rippled across screens and hearts like a shared collective ache. In that single instant, the long-held secret could no longer remain hidden. It was never a scandal, never a headline. It was a quiet, profound love she had tended behind closed doors. Love so deep, so quietly fierce, that its sudden absence left even the strongest men breaking down in open, raw grief. This was the moment her carefully constructed mask finally cracked. While the world laughed at Moira Rose, traded memes, and marveled at her flamboyant wigs, she had been fighting a battle we never glimpsed. The whispered names that floated through those final hours were not rivals, but testaments. She had been a guiding light to the cast of Schitt's Creek, a maternal force to child stars, and a steady comedic anchor for a world that often felt unmoored. The shock landed with a visceral punch. Even the media, usually relentless, ravenous, insatiable, paused in stunned silence. There were no scandalous headlines, no voyeuristic speculation, only a raw, unfiltered ache that spread from coast to coast. By leaving us yearning for just one more laugh, one more scene, one last fleeting moment, she reclaimed her story on her own terms, in the most hauntingly beautiful way imaginable. The quiet she left behind is far from empty. It hums with the weight of every gift she gave, and the cruel suddenness with which it was taken. Catherine O'Hara's story is more than a Hollywood obituary. It is a wake-up call, a reminder to the living. Behind every accent perfected, every wig meticulously placed, every punchline delivered with impeccable timing, there existed a human being, vulnerable, unseen, irreplaceable. Her journey from the bustling dinner tables of Toronto to the solemn stillness of her final days in Los Angeles forces a hard truth upon us. We often consume the joy artists give without ever asking what it costs them. We assumed her presence was infinite because she made us feel limitless. We believed the woman who survived bandits in Home Alone, bankruptcy in Schitt's Creek, and a world full of unpredictable chaos could survive anything. But life, unlike a scripted narrative, offers no guaranteed happy ending, no promised third act. And so, as we say goodbye, we are left with the singular, poetic, haunting reminder of her humanity, the one truth that even legends cannot escape. Even the brightest stars can fall, and even the fiercest lights can dim too soon.